This is the CT Sports Talent Show. My name is Chris Saunders, and I'm pleased to have on from the Rep-Am. First time having somebody from the Rep-Am on the podcast, and it's a great time to be able to have Roger Cleveland, who is a sports writer and covers from high school to college up at UConn and such. Roger, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. This is going to be a lot of fun.
My pleasure, Chris. I enjoy it.
Raj, when I think about, because we're in the bye week, I know there are technically two teams playing. St. Paul is playing Derby. That's the only really matchup. It's a makeup game. But for the majority, and I know Naugatuck played on Monday against Gilbert Northwestern Housatonic, and that was a game that Naugatuck won in their fashion, as they are 5-0 and in the top three of Class L. I kind of want to talk with you and kind of recap what has been the NVL through the first 5 weeks. I'll give you the floor as far as kind of what are your thoughts that you've seen through the first 5 weeks of the football season in the NVL?
It comes down to basically the same thing. You look at it and you think, man, Ansonia and Naugatuck again. There are other good teams out there. I like Oxford, what they're doing. Mm-hmm. I really like the Collette kid at Holy Cross. He's helping them be a pretty solid team. There are other good teams, but it comes down to the big two again. And I'll tell you, I go into most seasons thinking Ansonia is the best team in the league. And this year, I think that Naugatuck is the best team that I've seen. But if you forced me to bet right now who's going to win on Thanksgiving, I would probably still pick Ansonia. They always seem to get progressively better, especially a team like this where they lost some pretty good talent. But they bring kids along, and as they get into that Ansonia frame of mind, they just seem to get better and better. But I love what Naugatuck's doing so far.
Naugatuck going into that game on Monday, and I'd have to kind of look back at the stats to see if they've been changed, and I'm sure they have. But going into that game, the varsity defense had not played in the second half of games, and they had given up a total of 0 touchdowns. Right? And they've only given up 10 first downs varsity defense wise. Now that may have changed in the game on Monday, but still, when you hear those kind of numbers, I could see why the juice is really high for the hype that Naugatuck is getting. What says you?
For me, it's actually the opposite. I look at what they have on offense right now, and I love Jet Hall. Ansonia coach Tom Brockett had said before the season to me, you know what, Jet Hall may be the best player in the state. And, for him to say something like that, it kind of sticks in the back of your mind. And a couple of times that I've seen Naugatuck play, I've been really impressed with him. I mean, for him just to be able to throw the ball pretty well is great. But the kid is just a good athlete, not the biggest, not the strongest, but he's a tough kid who just seems to get things done, seems to find the speed when he needs it, the toughness when he needs it. Yep. So I've been really impressed with him and, the Martinez kid as well. Yeah. And then you throw Diedelbaum on top of it, and there's 3 of maybe the best 10 players in the NVL right now. So I realize that, Diedelbaum and those guys have roles on defense too. But to me, the way you have to beat Ansonia is you have to be able to score with them. You're not going to win a lot of 14-7 games or whatever. So I'm impressed with the offense.
When I look at now, this is based off of because I joined the NVL as far as Ansonia and Naugatuck for football a little bit late. So I've only seen a couple games in terms of the rivalry, right? I know in 2019, the year that Naugatuck started 5-5, ended 5-0, ended up 5-5 was when Tishabamba and all those guys end up getting hurt, and Ansonia railed through them during that Thanksgiving Day game. If you think about 21 and 22, low scoring games. Naugatuck won in 21 because of Jet Hall. Remember that he was a flea flicker pass over to Robertson, the basketball player, wide receiver, made the catch. That ended up being the game-winning play a couple plays later for them. And then last year, I think it was 14-7, and as you mentioned, the score was, or somewhere around there. Something just tells me that when we look at that matchup, and I know we're looking at it way down the line, there's other games that have to be played, but you think about it, both teams could potentially be undefeated going in, right? And the player that helped kind of seal the deal and break the curse for Naugatuck not being able to beat Ansonia was Jet Hall. And now you fast forward 2 years, now he goes from being a part of that running back room, that stellar running back room for 2 years, and now is the headliner in terms of the QB1. What says you?
I say I'm impressed with Chris Anderson for having the foresight to make that change. I mean, I've seen a lot of teams at the high school level who have great running backs and don't tinker with that. That's where they want to use them, and they'll throw any decent kid at quarterback and hope that he just doesn't lose for you. And I think Chris said, no, let's hold on a second. If we use Jed at quarterback and let them both run and pass the ball, we've just become more dynamic offensively. And, it took a lot of changes on their part during
Yeah.
the offseason, learning new blocking schemes with a young offensive line. But I'm impressed with what I see so far. And like you say, when you return a kid like Jet, who's beaten Ansonia in the past, I think it changes the whole mentality of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a number of years when we've gone into Thanksgiving and said, this should be a good game finally between Naugatuck and Ansonia. Naugatuck is on a roll. They're beating everybody else. It should be really good. And it would come to the game against Ansonia and they'd be a little flat, or they just wouldn't have the confidence that they needed to go out and beat a team like that that's just going to keep coming at you and coming at you and has that aggressive mentality. I think that maybe Naugatuck has the right guys now who might have the proper attitude, but we'll see again. It doesn't just come down to Jet Hall. You can beat the Crosbys, the Woodlands, the whatever other team is out there with his skill. You have to have guys who can block when it comes to that game. And we'll see. It is a younger offensive line for Naugatuck, or a more inexperienced offensive line. Do they have enough time to get together to build a chemistry and become confident by the time they play on Thanksgiving? I don't know. We'll see. But that's what makes this fun. I mean, right now, again, if I'm just looking at the two teams, I think Naugy's a little bit better. But I wouldn't put money on that come Thanksgiving time, which makes it great.
And I think it's good too in terms of the matchups we have coming up. Naugatuck plays a Woodland team and Torrington team back to back in terms of weeks. They play on the 20th and the 27th. And I'll be curious to see not just the scores, but also how long, depending on the scores, are we going to see the varsity defense in the second half? What's the offense going to look like in terms of who's going to be playing and such? I think that's going to be key. I want to go to Ansonia because, again, we talk about a team that graduated a lot of talented players on Naugatuck. And Sonia did the same thing. You graduate Kaminsky and one of the older brother Romanowski, and the running back as well, whose father is the mayor up at Ansonia, right? But he did return back Ingram, who I know from the basketball side. Preston Jubina, who is a massive player, tight end, can play multiple positions. Obviously, a very good blocker. I have not seen Ansonia yet. I don't know if you have, Roger, but what have you seen or heard about this Ansonia team through 5 weeks?
Well, I have seen him. I don't remember if I saw him once or twice, but what I really like about him is Makai Ingram is taking his game to another level. I mean, he was that extra running back who was just kind of learning in the past. He's a tough kid, and he's got some great quickness. I like him a lot, and he pairs incredibly well with Sean Richards, who's their fullback, who has been carrying the ball a little bit more this year, as well as just blocking. And the two of them are a great combo. They're as good a combo as I think any couple running backs in the league. Maybe Naugatuck is a little bit better right now with Martinez in there with Jet, but it's a really strong pairing. But the thing with Ansonia is they always seem to have an offensive line that, they did lose some talent on that offensive line. They lost a couple All-Staters, but they always seem to get into that French warfare mindset. By the end of the season, they're pretty good. The thing that I wonder about with them is just their quarterback. But Matteo Sorrentino is it, like you said, they lost their quarterback. They're bringing him along. In the game that I watched him play, he didn't have to have an impact, and he didn't. He was probably like 0 for 4, something like that. Ansonia's always been one of those teams where they'll pound the ball, they'll pound the ball, they'll pound it. You're sneaking up, you're trying to make a play. And
Yeah.
then the quarterback only has to throw a 10-yard pass over a linebacker or something. And
Yeah.
it's a big play and it makes a difference in the game.
Looking at that Ansonia team last year, I felt like they had a complete team because they not only could run the ball, but they had a quarterback that they had faith that could pass it, right? In 21, when Kaminsky was coming out of the COVID year, I could tell that Brockett had not training wheels, but he was very hesitant to have him throw the football in games late, right? And then I
Yeah.
think about, again, to go to the previous season, when I remember doing that Ansonia Holy Cross game, Kaminsky had to make some throws, especially when he was dealing with Maldonado and the older Chivises and the younger Chivas and all that. And he made some spectacular plays for that Ansonia team. And you mentioned the quarterback, and I have not again had not seen Ansonia, but I think of the first obvious thing, which is pounding the rock, using their aggressiveness and their strength to kind of bury teams and kind of bring down the will. I'll be curious to see the matchup again going to Thanksgiving, but just over the course of time, how does Brockett kind of work? Because I feel like you're going to have to throw the ball. I feel like for that matchup on Thanksgiving, there could be 10 to 15 throws that may have to be made in order for the team to win on the offensive side. What says you?
I think that Naugatuck may have to make 10 or 15 throws to win. Yeah, and it depends on how Ansonia's offensive line comes along.
Yeah.
They've won many a state title with a team that just pounds the ball at you and breaks your will eventually. So, I'm more of the mindset that they have to have somebody who can have 3 or 4 timely completions that
Uh-huh.
really breaks the back of the other team, gives them that first down that they need, or scores that one extra touchdown that they need, and forces the other team to respect that a little bit and open things back up for the running game. And I like your analogy of the training wheels with Kaminsky in the past, and I kind of get the feeling that's where Sorrentino is right now. They're
Mhm.
not going to make him win any games. They want to put him in position where he can make a play here and there, build up some confidence so that come Thanksgiving time, state tournament time, maybe he's ready to make a couple plays. And we'll see how it goes from there. If you're counting on him to make 10 or 15 passes,
Mhm.
then I don't think that Antonia's going to win a big game. But
Mhm.
again, they've so many times in the past only needed a few big pass plays or a couple of key pass plays to make it work.
And Sonia's schedule from here on out, they have Holy Cross 4-1, then they play Derby, then they have Woodland, Oxford, Naugatuck. So except for Derby, they're playing teams that are 4-1, 3-2. Woodland currently right now, Oxford 5-0, Naugatuck 5-0. So in terms of the names, people would think, oh, in past years, Ansonia will just roll by. But when I look at kind of who they've had so far, they've been close. Gilbert Northwestern Housatonic has played them hard twice. Now I know the game got out of hand, a couple of weeks ago, and the score shows that. But though that game in Seymour were tight, and then obviously a couple of things go Ansonia way. They make sure they don't make mistakes. They wait for you to make the mistake, and then they pounce and they capitalize, and that's when they do their thing. So I wonder if those close games, looking at it from a Ansonia side, is that almost like what Brockett wanted? I want to see how do they react when it's close, right? Because when you're blowing teams out, how much can you really judge from that? Really?
I agree with you. I think if you were to ask Tom, he doesn't love winning every game 42-6 and having that touchdown for the other team come at scrub time when the reserves are in. He wants to be challenged, and I think it's good for this team. There's talent on this team, but they lost their more talented players, and now they have to kind of generate some more kids and get them into that frame of mind where they can be more dominant. And the best way to do that is playing competitive games. And I think he's probably pretty pleased with the way they've come along so far, the way they've been tested in a few games. And I'm sure he embraces the fact that there's some games coming up now that he has to play in.
I want to turn the page over to Oxford because I've texted Coach Stockmo a couple of times. And I said, well, I don't know what's going on in Oxford. I don't know what's in the water, but you guys are rolling right now, right? They're 5-0, first time ever that they were 4-0 and 5-0 ever in program history. When you think about this Oxford team now, when I did talk to Coach Stockmo, who's been a part of the program for many, many years, coached at Hill House, won a couple titles. The most recent one was 15 years ago, he told me. I know that they got, now you could say sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. I know Kennedy, when they played them a couple weeks ago, had, I think, if I recall, the ball within inside their 5 yard line on the Oxford side a couple times. They fumbled it. They were down against Woodland 13-0 early and then fought back. I can see that in two ways. One, I could say, oh, yeah, they got lucky and, the team didn't do their thing and didn't kind of capitalize, right? But at the same time, I could say, well, Oxford didn't crumble and say, oh, woe is us. This isn't just our day. They kept fighting and just kept doing their thing. So I can see both sides.
Yeah, and I was at the Woodland game. It is the best game I've seen this year because it was very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say back and forth because it was 13-0, and then Oxford scores the final 16 points. It was competitive, and I think that for a team like Oxford, it was exactly what they needed. They need to fall behind. They need to face a little bit of adversity. They don't have a tradition. They really don't. They've been 8-3 a couple times, but they really haven't won any championships or won those big games when they really had to.
Mm-hmm.
So with a team like that, you have to build, slowly win a game that maybe you shouldn't have, gain a little bit of confidence, and then come back. And I wouldn't say that they didn't deserve to beat Woodland. I think they did. They outplayed them in the second half when it mattered. And, Stockwell said to me, you kind of need a game like this where you beat a program that everybody else respects, looks at and says, well, you haven't played anybody up to this point. Well, now all of a sudden you've beaten Woodland. You've come from behind against them.
Uh-huh.
Your quarterback who's throwing the ball better and the Dorosh kid, he gets hurt. And you got to go with McGuire, who has been a starter for them and, plays a lot. But still, there's a little bit of adversity within the game that you have to overcome. And I was impressed with how they fought back. That was a tremendous win. I think they're the best story of the first half of the season right now. But let's face it, if you look at their schedule, they haven't beaten anybody tremendous. Woodland is solid.
Mm-hmm.
Seymour has the potential to be a really good team, but neither one of them played tremendously against them. So, you know, it's great for Oxford. I love all the enthusiasm. I love the momentum, but their toughest games are yet to come, or their toughest game. They have to play Ansonia,
Yep.
and we'll see. But by no means should that diminish what this team has done. Winning 5-0 for the first time in program history is a big accomplishment.
As I told Coach Jurowitz, who used to coach at Crosby and now is the O-line coach at Oxford, I said, the fact that this team has won, not like in the ways of like we've seen with some of the top tier teams in tier one, where they're just blowing the doors off everybody, right? Even if it's close, at some point in the game, the end result is they're blowing them out. Oxford really hasn't had that except for one game. I think it was against Wilby, if I recall. I have to go back and look at their schedule. But I told Coach Jurowitz that the fact that this team has won games when they played their A game. And then you could say Kennedy was their C minus game. Woodland, you could say, was their F game just because of what they did in the first half and whatnot. The fact that they've won in different ways, I guess, in terms when you look at the playoffs and with what they have coming up. Like you said, they do play Ansonia. They do also play Torrington as well on the 3rd of November. So there are a couple games on the schedule that will be competitive, right? And I think that it helps them. And if they can continue this, even if they do lose a game or two, depending on how things shape up, they could be looking at their first ever playoff appearance for football. I know it's early. I don't want to deem it, but when you think about it, if they do their job and even if they lose a game or two, Class S is not this, you got to go undefeated. Otherwise, you're going to drop out. I mean, there's a couple losses from once you get, I have to go back and look, but once you get past a certain point, there's some losses there.
There are, but I'll say right now, they're going to make the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go back to one thing you said about Woodland, and maybe this was their F performance. By no means was it an F performance in any way. If you talk to Stockmill, he would tell you in the first half, our blocking was just a little bit off. If a kid misses a block by a foot or a shoulder, or somebody else doesn't, combine with them to make the play just right, things can be off. And they're down 13-0. The biggest thing about that game was they fixed that. They went in at halftime, said, listen, you guys are close, but it takes this little extra bit of effort, this little bit extra execution, and they fixed it and went out and won. I think that was a huge, huge sign for them. So maybe they played a C, just an average first half, and then they came out and played a B plus in the second half. And then to your point about the schedule, they have a lot of wins coming up. I mean, you look at it, they still play St. Paul, Crosby, Torrington, and Derby. Those teams, and then you have the game against Ansonia in there. And Ansonia is, I think, the second to the last game of the season. So they're going to have some confidence, and they're going to have a reminder of just how good football can be. And, am I saying they absolutely would lose it? No. But in all probability, they will lose to Ansonia. But you learn a lot of things, just like you learned in the poor or average first half against Woodland. You learn when you face a great team like Ansonia, and then you still have another game to play after that, and then you play a good team in the tournament. So I think their schedule is perfect for them to make the tournament, gain some confidence, learn a lesson, and then see what they can do with it.
You make a good point, and I know that Oxford the last couple of years, and I don't remember if McGuire got hurt against Ansonia last year. I don't remember if that was the game or not, but I do know that Oxford has played them tough, and I know that I'm sure Brockett is obviously seeing this because they used to be copper mates back in the day before they went to the tiers. So, I think that's going to be also a game too, because you think about Class S right now. You've got Oxford, who is second, Ansonia is third right now in Class S. Bloomfield is number one currently right now. There could be a scenario where, again, depending on seeding, you could very well see Ansonia again, kind of like what we've seen the last couple of years with Seymour, where they're always matching up with Ansonia. They could never get away from them almost.
Yeah, no, I agree with, which is why it's great to play a very good team, because even if they don't play Ansonia again, they're going to play somebody good in the state tournament. So, you got to get a taste of that type of play. They're building confidence right now. They feel great about themselves, and that's all well and good, until the old Mike Tyson stuff, you get punched in the mouth, and let's see what happens. And Ansonia is going to do that. There's no question. Whether they beat them by a lot or beat them by a little or even lose to them, Ansonia is going to test them. And that's great. I think the way the season is playing out is really good for them. I really like the Doroch kid, by the way. You look at what they're doing, playing two different quarterbacks with McGuire and Doroch. And most teams that doesn't work for. These kids have the right personality to make it work. Doroch is a little bit better throwing downfield. McGuire is a little bit better with the soft punch on throws. They mix things up. They, both kids can make plays when they're not at quarterback. I really kind of enjoyed watching them play. And then there's also the 165 pounds offensive tackle, Nate Wolniak, who's also playing nose guard. And I had looked at the roster before I went out to the game. I said, this can't be right. 165 pounds, offensive tackle, nose guard, and he's the starter both ways. And I'm like, I got to talk to this kid after the game. And he truly is that small, but he's a wrestler. He's a tough kid. That's what this team is. They're tough. They have a bit of confidence right now, and they're going out there and playing hard. I kind of enjoy it.
They're gritty, and I think that's something that you need, especially going up against the Ansonias or other teams in Class S, right? I also want to hit on too Holy Cross. Speaking of a gritty team, I mean, I've said this, and I think it's, again, I have not seen it in the NVL. I think Holy Cross has the best wide receiver room in the NVL, right? Between Graves and Gray and Campbell, Florian, who's a basketball player. So when you think about that and the fact that they also have a quarterback who people tend to forget this, Coette's coming back next year. He started as a freshman midway through. I think it was the game you and I was calling it. You were next to us. I thought it was Kapritsky, and you were like, no, there's a new guy. It's Coette. And he first pass was an interception. I remember interviewing him before the season, and he said, I'm going to be honest with you, Chris. After I threw that, I was steaming. But he said a couple coaches came and said, you know what? It's over. It's done. And then Colette led a couple nice drives against Naugatuck late in that game. And at a moment, you thought, oh, maybe Holy Cross has a shot. They ended up losing that game, but he has been the starter ever since. And I think I've seen growth from him from last year to this year. And the more games I've seen of Holy Cross, I just wonder, and I've said this, and I don't know if you've heard it or maybe somebody has mentioned the youth that they have, right? They have a lot of inexperienced varsity players on the offensive line and in the secondary. And I just wonder, their ceilings are high, but when you know this with young players, high ceilings also lead to some high mistakes. And I'm not talking about high like they're making constant mistakes, but they come at the worst times, right? What says you?
Say that one of the most fun players for me to watch so far this year has been Colette.
Yeah.
I've been impressed because, as you said, he's got a young offensive line. He's not always getting the best protection, but the kid is still making plays. Yeah. And if he can continue to do that, then maybe the offensive linemen say, hey, geez, if we do a little bit better, if we just keep on working and grinding, and we can find ways to block for him a little bit better, we may come up with some big wins down the road. Or as you said, the kid's coming back. Like when I look at Holy Cross, basically what I'm thinking about is the future, because I look at him and I've really enjoyed watching him play. He throws the ball really well. He's not getting real flustered. I mean, he can't always make plays because he's under attack, but I like what I've seen out of him so far. The kid's thrown for 1,100 yards already this year. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. Now, the flip side of that is that their running game just isn't working as well as it should be. I think they only have a couple hundred yards rushing for the team this year. So, you wonder how that's going to balance out. And they do have some good athletes. I mean, you had mentioned Marquez Campbell as part of their passing game. I mean, that's a kid who could be a really good running back. And I believe last year had a pretty good season. But if the offensive line can't block or isn't quite as good as it should be, it kind of makes the running game tough to generate. So it'd be fun to see what they could be like if a couple of their running backs all of a sudden got some room to work and could generate a little bit of balance on that offense.
One thing I've noticed from Coet, from the Woodland game that we did, and then the one that we most previously called, which was the Seymour game. The Woodland game, any sort of pressure, he was just bailing out. He was throwing it. There was no accuracy, and there was miscommunication with the wide receivers. Even Naugatuck, same thing. Because I remember Mafo was doing some pre-snap motions, was moving guys around. The defense would show, maybe a cover 3, and then they'd show something completely different on the post-snap, right? But what I noticed against Seymour was with Coet, very patient, was willing to take the throw, even if it was only a 2-yard throw. He would take that, live to fight another day. So I have seen growth from him. And you mentioned the running back position. There's a freshman, Nathan Kraft, who has been, now I understand, high praise. I'm not trying to say that he's either of these kids, but in terms of what he was nicknamed back in the day, they called him a young Michael Diedelbaum because the way he runs the ball, he's kind of that old style Ansonia, Naugy, NVL kind of back where it's 3 yards, put my helmet down, I'm just going to take you down. And if you don't stop me, I'm going to get another 5, 8, 10 plus yards. I think that's a kid. He's only a freshman. He can catch the ball in the backfield. He's a pretty decent blocker, but I think he's a kid that if he can gain the confidence of the varsity staff of Gene Petrucci and Mullins, who's the OC, I think that can kind of be that like high ceiling player that can kind of take this team. Like you mentioned, running back position has been a weak spot for them. If that can become a strength, especially being now in Class M, there's some tough teams in there. So I'll be curious to see kind of that growth as well.
Yeah, I would be too. Like I said, I think they do need to generate a running game. And one more time, when I think of Holy Cross, I think about the future. You got another year out of the best quarterback so far in the league. Well, let me retract that because Jet Hall is the best quarterback. But Gwinnett may be the best pure passer right now in the NVL. And you just wonder what things will be like if he gets a little bit more experienced players around him, a line that can block, a kid like Kraft, who I think we saw into the Nuggets game. He had a few good runs there. I mean, it's mop up time at that point, but still, the kid's running hard. This is his opportunity to go out and play, and he ran pretty well. So, I kind of like what Holy Cross has to look forward to, and maybe that'll be looking forward to at the end of this year if they can get a few more wins and sneak in or something like that. You never know.
Roger, we're just about run out of time. I really appreciate you coming on the show. This was a lot of fun being able to talk about some of the recapping of the first 5 weeks of the NVL season. Hopefully, I see you around during the broadcast that we have coming up. And again, this was a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot for having me, Chris. Enjoyed it.
Always. That'll wrap things up here in the CT Sports Talent Show. So until next time, stay safe. Remember, CT stands for Connecticut Talent. I'm Dream Find them all. Enjoy the show, everybody, and be well.